Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to throw my own thoughts into the discussion concerning the face-off between the current and former leaders of the SNP and what impact it may or may not be having on the Scottish elections and wider debate around independence. But first of all, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, some careful political footwork required of Conservatives, Labour and the SNP over the coming week. But I want to tackle the SNP first because it's the most straightforward in many ways, if anything in politics can be straightforward. Essentially, there's a huge row blowing up between the SNP's current leader, Nicola Sturgeon, and former leader, Alex Salmond. And if you read any accounts of what's going on, it all seems very partisan. But that does mean this is going to be Scottish Independence Sunday, because I've got another video sort of on the subject, but from a completely different angle later today. But with the elections coming up in Scotland, I imagine it's going to be topical a few more times before we're done. Essentially, with the latest bit of political intrigue, opponents of the SNP, especially those aligned with the Conservatives, will describe this as a shocking lack of integrity on the part of the First Minister and that she should absolutely be resigning. Supporters of the SNP, with the possible exception of the small minority on Salmond's side here, say that it's just a bit of argy-bargy and nobody in the wider public really cares about it. The truth is, as is often the case, somewhere in between. It does seem quite likely that Sturgeon has not exactly behaved as you would expect such a senior politician to. She's misled Parliament and misled the general Scottish public. In terms of the view in the general public, I would argue that the public at any time wouldn't really care enough about covering up a situation like this. Not to say it's fine, but the public at any time would be fairly sanguine about it. But thanks to Boris Johnson, we've become so desensitised to genuinely abhorrent behaviour from our elected representatives that the public now would consider it a complete nonsense to resign for something like this. All that's happening is Conservatives are trying to damage the SNP ahead of the May elections in Scotland. Now, polling that I've seen would seem to suggest that the SNP are very likely to regain control of Parliament. Although the SNP are currently in government in Scotland, it's a minority government. They lost their outright majority in the last elections, but have every expectation of regaining it this year thanks to a combination of Brexit and the bubbleheads who forced it onto us still doing their thing. However, we're not talking about the sort of domination the SNP enjoy in the UK general elections. They are expected to just sneak it. But although the latest trouble may not be a huge public issue in itself, when the result is expected to be tight, even a relatively minor bump in the road can be crucial. The difference between having that majority and not can come down to one MSP. A single member of the Scottish Parliament can decide whether or not it's a majority government or still a minority government. In a tight contest, you could almost imagine the thoughts going through supporters' minds when Alex Salmond, someone who says he's been a lifelong campaigner for Scottish independence, and to what, I wouldn't disagree with that, when he said that Scotland is not fit for independence right now. Which is a curious thing to say from someone who says that he's a lifelong campaigner for Scottish independence. But the fact of the matter is that the SNP have no credible opposition in Scotland. Amplifying this issue is not going to make a massive difference on the way people will vote in the elections, but a poll that I saw suggested, well, first there was a few polls that are relevant here. One I saw suggested that Sturgeon has the overwhelming support of the party despite this spat. It hasn't split into those on Salmond's side, those on Sturgeon's side. I suppose it's hardly surprising. Party members above all support a leader whom they believe is going to deliver. While she continues to deliver, of course, they'll support her. Recent polling has the SNP losing some ground in both voting intentions and support for independence. Now, we're 10 weeks away from the Scottish elections. The stakes are very high. This is effectively very much like the Brexit referendum that produced a slender lead for Leave that then changed our entire constitution without a second's further thought. If the SNP win their majority, even if it's just by one MSP, then they will have their mandate for a second independence referendum. What happens after that, I don't quite know. Similarly, if the SNP fail to achieve that overall majority, even if they still form a government, which I don't think is in any serious doubt, then they will not have that mandate as such. Again, what happens then? I don't know. Sturgeon has said that winning a majority means a mandate for the referendum. If she doesn't get that majority, I hardly think she's going to say that she's lost that mandate. Can't imagine how that would play in the party or the wider movement. That being said, the case for independence weakens if the SNP don't win the majority and strengthens if they do, or at least the case for a referendum. Last year, Johnson was advised to say that he would not, that he shouldn't block a second referendum if the SNP won a majority. He should have taken that advice. It would not only have made that majority less likely, but if there's going to be another referendum, quite frankly, better it be sooner rather than later. Although the polls have got consistently showing a majority support for independence for nearly 2 years now, it hasn't been a huge majority. Referenda don't just happen. There's a campaign, and the side with the most effective campaign will always win, because if they're already too far behind, then they won't. But the one with the most effective campaign will tilt the needle towards them. So in a tight situation, the campaign is more likely to win. Now, in such a situation, I can see Remain winning. But what I'd say is, with near certainty, it's more likely to win in 2022 than a few years later. But back to Sturgeon's troubles, and there's the way the Conservatives in particular are trying to spin this bit of infighting as an egregious breach of the code and a resigning matter. And it's not only me that needs to point this out, but any Conservative supporters who are calling for her head are frankly hypocrites. Boris Johnson was found to have acted unlawfully by the Supreme Court. Priti Patel has been found by an internal investigation to have bullied staff, and it's also quite likely she's in contempt of court. Suella Braverman, the Attorney General, could also be argued to be in contempt of court and has certainly broken the ministerial code. Dominic Cummings broke the law, and then virtually the entire cabinet arguably broke the ministerial code again in defending his behaviour. Brandon Lewis told Parliament that he intended to break the law in the House of Commons. Matt Hancock has been found to have acted unlawfully, and virtually every member of cabinet has dropped a clanger so big that it would have cost them their jobs in any government in the past. Whereas Sturgeon has arguably been a bit naughty, and I'm not defending it, in order to play party politics and then to cover up for her own political credibility. She hasn't done anything that, for example, means squandering vast sums of public money. In the grand scheme of things, this is a little bit like Trump supporters saying that Trump shouldn't have been impeached for starting a civil war, but it was absolutely right for Bill Clinton to be impeached for lying about an affair. Where this spat might have an impact is on the cause for independence itself, however. Alex Salmond is currently deeply unpopular within the movement, so re-emerging back into prominence could have the effect of turning some people off. Essentially, just as Boris Johnson is a constant source of own goals for the unionist side, Alex Salmond does the same for separatists these days. If the story runs along similar lines for the next 10 weeks, in a tight contest, and especially if Johnson's advisers can somehow persuade him to keep his mouth closed, well, Scotland, it could end up having a material effect on the elections there. At the same time, if you're trying to stop a particular party from winning an election, highlighting issues with them is only half the battle. That can work to turn voters away from them, but you still don't really win unless there's an obvious alternative for those voters to rally around. And this is where it comes back to that lack of effective opposition in Scotland. Any voters turned off are unlikely to congregate around a single alternative. This limits the effect, as disaffected SNP voters will either spread their votes around or, in actual fact, just not show up to the polls at all. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.